Thanks, Bobby. That was a good clarification. One thing I did want to make another point about was that a lot of people were concerned, hey, if banks are not allowed to operate in the Bitcoin ecosystem, does that mean that companies like btc-china will have problems making deposits and withdrawing money from banks? Not a problem at all, because from the bank's perspective, they're just touching currency, renminbi, and they don't touch Bitcoin. That's Bobby's business. So there's no problem with deposits and withdrawals. We're hoping that the regulation makes it even easier for Bobby to do deposits and withdrawals. We were sitting in the office the other day, and I said, because there is no regulation particularly applied to Bobby's business, he's basically the equivalent of a noodle stand, right? So when he shows up with 10 million renminbi to deposit, they're like, why do you have 10 million renminbi to deposit? You're a noodle stand as far as they're concerned, right? So the regulation will hopefully make it easier, because obviously if you were a commodities broker or you were an insurance company, making large deposits and large withdrawals would make sense, right? So that's one of the things we're really hoping will open up and make doing that easier. So there's a lot of things we're looking for in the future. The other thing I wanted to clarify was that I think that this ruling that we've seen in China is very similar to what they did with virtual goods and virtual goods trading. Brock, who you saw earlier, we co-invest together, and we invested in BTC-China. We knew you'd be #1, Bobby. So was basically because we saw that in the early days of virtual goods, when people started trading, their sort of disaster for some pot of virtual gold, the governments basically said, hey, look, you as game companies cannot operate in the trading business. And by doing that, it allowed for lots of little guys to basically build exchanges and say, hey, I can trade this virtual good gold for money, or I can change this particular weapon for money, and so forth. And that's where it all really began, as a long, great story about sort of how that evolved in China. A lot of people in China actually ended up farming gold and supplying the entire world for that within large gains. But what that did was it made the grass completely, or the field completely wide open for little guys to operate, kept the big players out, the game companies themselves, and then the ecosystem unfolded, and it's now a multi-billion-dollar industry. That's good, because that means that companies like BTC-China and other Bitcoin companies in China have an opportunity to really build a multi-billion-dollar industry, and then regulation that applies specifically to them will unfold as appropriate. And it means that the banks and the insurance companies and so forth can't just come in and gobble it up. So we all see that as a good thing. We're disappointed about payments not being a viable business right now, but I believe, and many conversations I've had sort of come from the same standpoint, that as currency regulation begins to loosen up and the currency is freely tradable, that payments may become an interesting possibility later, because at that point then there isn't worry about currency control, which is currently the policy in China. So a couple things is you've seen the market has grown, and so has BTC-China, so that's been a really good thing, but for the future. But let's talk about some of the threats. So there's a couple to keep in mind. First are bad actors. We really, really do not want those people doing things that would bring regulatory reaction. That's people doing all kinds of bad things, whether it's illegal activity or things that just aren't good for society. As China has a strong policy against pornography and other things that may be acceptable in other countries, but China has strong policies around that. So we certainly don't want to see Bitcoin being used for things within China that would cause them to want to clamp down on it and make it harder for us to do business. So we call those bad actors, and some of it would be illegal, and some of it basically just moral standards there. The second is cryptocurrency fragmentation. As there's more and more currencies, we think that creates more confusion in the marketplace. And so things need to be easier, not harder. There's just a lot to work on for us from the industry standpoint to make it easier for consumers, because we're really, really at the early adopter phase. I'm sure many of you have seen the adoption curves that show where we are in the adoption phase. China, I would say, is a little bit ahead of the rest of the world in some respects, because the adoption has just gone like crazy. Part of that is because of the speculation. People see it as an investment. And I think when you have so many engineers running around, they're quite happy to spend an evening of leisurely reading, understanding how cryptocurrency works. Right, Bobby?
Yeah.
Okay. Ultimately, I think fragmentation is going to be good. Like as we were talking about Mastercoin yesterday, I think there's a lot of great applications. But I think right now, until things are easier for consumers, fragmentation will make it more confusing. And I think that a lot of the smaller currencies are going to have weird volatility and not as much support and have more risk associated with them. So obviously if people lose money, that goes to the third point, that can be bad. So the volatility aspect causing bad publicity. Grandma put in, she thought she was going to be able to retire, put all of her money into Bitcoin and lost it all. That's not good. So obviously we're worried about that, and we don't want to go there. So I think right now it's almost impossible for grandma to figure out how to buy Bitcoin, so we're probably safe. But you never know. My mom lives Farmville and buys virtual gold all the time. So the next thing is the future of Bitcoin in China. So we believe ultimately it looks very, very positive. More speculation is coming. There's tons of money flowing into the market, and obviously because of the returns you can get relative to, say, real estate or stocks. I think there's also a libertarian component. I think that Chinese investors feel really safe because Bitcoin can't really be manipulated the way fiat currency or other kinds of industries can. And so I think there's a real desire for sort of self-determination, and I think that drives part of it as well as the technical aspects of it. The other thing is that because the BTC renminbi now represents over 50% of the transactions globally, we don't see that trend changing. But what is interesting is Litecoin. Now, many of you may know that actually Bobby's brother was the inventor of Litecoin, and so we refer to their dad as BitDad. He's sitting here in the audience, and we're like, "Did your wife know that you're going to have 2 kids who literally changed the course of cryptocurrency on the planet?" So probably not at the time. Basically, here's the other businesses we think are really interesting. So exchanges and trading. So what's happening in exchanges? The general ecosystem, generally when tech businesses come to China, they mirror this exact same pattern. And that is, a lot of companies will jump in. Usually the first guy will make all of the money. So we're excited that that's going to be Bobby and BTC-China. But there'll be 10,000 followers. And then they will completely beat each other up on price. And then it's basically a war of attrition. So whoever has the most resources and the most efficient business model, serves customers the best, will typically win. And we've seen this over and over and over. I can give you, I used to run Groupon for China in the joint venture with Groupon and Tencent, and it was exactly the same thing. The day we announced we were going into China, there were 3,000 group buying competitors. The day we launched, there were 6,000. And 9 months later, we were in the top 10, and they were just dying off like crazy because obviously everybody drove the margins to zero, and only the guys who had enough resources survived. This is, I think, going to be a similar model. They've implemented the zero fee. I think there's still a fee for withdrawal. So there's still a little bit of money to be made in the meantime. But a lot of guys are not going to survive, and maybe a year or two from now, you'll see massive consolidation, and the winners will be the winners. So the trading business is still very strong. I would say, how many competitors are there now, do you think, in the trading business?
Well, half a dozen.
Yeah, it's like 6. So I think that number will just continue to proliferate, and then we'll see consolidation. The payment space, as we talked about, is unfortunate. I think for now, it's kind of a no-go. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the future is interesting, and we'll wait to see how currency rules open up, and then maybe Bitcoin can join. But today, it's not viable. Now, mining is insane in China. Insane. The first big mining companies we've seen are 65 nanometer technology, just monster machines. People cranking out these ASICs and just loving it. I mean, it was like literally like a geek's dream, because you could just play with these things and money would come out the other side. So I can't tell you how many Bitcoin millionaires I've met in China these days. They're very funny characters, because these are guys who are doing it in their basement, and they really love the idea that they have this machine that spits out money. I mean, I think we all have this dream of having a printing press in our basement. These guys actually do, and they love it. And so mining is just insane, and I think it is ground zero. They're just insane for it. And so something is about to happen. In the next 90 days, you're going to see serious ASIC mining technology thrown at Litecoin. And so if you think Bitcoin is popular in China, you have no idea how popular Litecoin is. Part of the reason is because, one, Litecoin is in an earlier phase of its life cycle relative to Bitcoin. So, there's the 4-year mark when sort of things change and there's this deceleration in terms of the amount you can make in mining. That phase has not yet occurred. We're only like 2.5 years in Litecoin. So there's still a lot of legs left, and the ASIC entry is going to really make, a lot of people are going to make a ton of money. And so ASIC mining for Litecoin is about to kick in. Probably the next time there's an Inside Bitcoin conference, it will have already opened up and really changed things there. So that's huge. And then, of course, there's a ton of other cryptocurrencies behind it. I can't tell you, which ones are going to be awesome in China next after that, but Litecoin has got a lot of legs left in it. So that's a really huge trend. And then ATMs and kiosks. I think because of the desire for people to actually physically take their cash and turn it into Bitcoin, I believe this is going to be a massive trend. I think that the levels of exchange that we're seeing now digitally online, I think we could see a multiple of that with kiosks. So we're really excited about that because guys love to stand in line with stacks of cash and turn it into something else. It's just the culture there. If you've ever been to China and you've seen how people like to carry around cash, the largest note is equivalent to about $15. So if you want to carry around any significant amount of money, it definitely puts a bulge in your pocket. So people are used to that. They're used to like carrying around big wads of cash to do things. And so we think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to take advantage in that space. So there's a ton of other businesses. There's wallets, there's payment mechanisms and purchase mechanisms, a ton of other businesses, but these are, I think, the 4 biggest that there's trends. I'd love to answer questions about China. We can talk to you ad nauseum about the opportunities there and so forth.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to ask about is there a conflict here between, the Chinese government has been generally positive, so it seems, about Bitcoin, right? And we see that the business is flourishing and your business is flourishing, but on the other hand, what about capital controls? Aren't the government worried about Chinese people, buying Bitcoins and sending them abroad or moving abroad with them, carrying large amounts of money and, smuggling them?
So the question is about capital controls in China, right? So as of the ruling from last week, Bitcoin is not a currency. So capital controls pertain to currency. So Bitcoin is just a virtual good. So at this point, I think people will be allowed to buy and sell Bitcoin. And it's unrelated to foreign currency. Now, things may be clarified more in the coming weeks. So at this point, that's the answer. It's similar to gold. People in China can buy gold. They can put it under their mattress, or they could take it on an airplane and go to Hong Kong. So it's similar to that.
Yeah, I think the issue of using Bitcoin as a proxy to do currency exchange and so forth. I mean, technically, of course, people can do that all they want, but I think the policy is, you're not supposed to use it for foreign exchange. People will do whatever they want. If they go and buy gold, they put it in their pocket and they go across the border and then they turn that gold into another currency. I mean, technically, you're not supposed to do it, but I would say that it's in effect not. And there's a lot of things in China like that. There's a lot of things that are technically you're not supposed to do, but are very loosely policed. And then once in a while, some guy, gets policed. Usually it's because somebody else doesn't like him, and it's like, hey, there's corruption in the government. It's like, well, actually, yeah, we know, but this guy is really bad. But what about whatever? Forget those other guys. So I mean, this happened. Just to give an example, there was a big corruption scandal in the pharmaceutical industry, and this one Western company got singled out, and everybody knew that everybody else was like 10 times worse. These guys were like giving people, golf trips, and the other guys were basically like, hey, cocaine and hookers. Like they were like whatever, they just did whatever. So the point is that the guys who got nabbed, the guys who got basically called out, and I think a lot of people think it was more political than it was anything else, but that's just the reality. Like things are illegal, people do them, and when it gets policed, everyone says, okay, somebody got caught, but that's just the reality of the situation. I think it's similar here. A lot of us speed, but it's only wrong if you get caught, right?
So we've all seen what happens when a exchange can't handle volume, and so I wanted to see if you could comment on the infrastructure that you've built, and with what strategy, and how much bandwidth do you still have at this time?
Yeah, we're constantly revamping the back end to support more and more throughput. We've seen volumes go up 100 times. Thankfully, we scaled our system in the summertime to handle this volume. So we've reached 150,000 coins a day. And it's much more significant than 150,000 back in April because of the increased price, which means many more transactions per second. So for the next year, we're targeting another 100x increase in transactions and volume.
Are you practicing a multiple location strategy for?
Yeah, we do use distributed cloud infrastructure for our backend. Yes.
Can you summarize? Basically, BTC-China has reached the point where if something bad happens to BTC-China, it'll be bad for Bitcoin. Can you summarize a bit the security precautions you take, avoid theft, and so on?
Yes. We have good security in place. So I think either close to or over 99% of our Bitcoins held on behalf of our customers are in cold storage. So there's essentially a very, very small hot wallet, which we also have multiple levels of precaution to make sure it doesn't get hacked and doesn't get stolen. And then in terms of the fiat currency, it's all held by third-party payment systems. So it's all held outside of our reach, if you will. So we have our operating funds segregated from customer deposits.
Hello, Cody here from Austin. Two questions for you. First question, has Bitcoin payment options been removed from Baidu already? And I think there was a Chinese telecom company that was accepting. Has all that stopped immediately?
It was sensational news. Essentially, Baidu had a small division for a small service. They started accepting Bitcoin. It doesn't represent Baidu, the corporate, but since the regulation got announced last Thursday, essentially several of these higher profile companies have withdrawn their sort of verbal intent to accept Bitcoin. So I think it covered Baidu and China Telecom. So it's just to comply with the wishes of the government.
Thank you. Second question was around arbitrage. I've noticed that the China price can fluctuate up to 30% higher than the price you see here in America. Have you any comments on that, or what is the opportunity for buying in America, transferring to btc-china, selling, arbitrage?
There's a lot of arbitrage going on. There's people all around the world doing arbitrage, people here left and right doing arbitrage across multiple exchanges. The reality is even if prices are higher on one exchange, the arbitrage process takes longer and is more complex than you think it is. And the reason of the complexities is because of the fiat currencies, the limits, the delays in transfer of funds. So that's why, it'll be common to see prices differ across exchanges in different countries by up to 10, 20, 30%. So it's a way of life, and people can go in and try to make the money, but it's certainly harder than it looks.
Yeah, the biggest problem is if you, for example, generated a gain on one exchange and you only have a certain amount of cash that you're working with in terms of float, you have to be able to move the cash from one place to another. And basically moving that money in and out of China, there's no regulatory framework that allows you to do that right now. So it's not easy.
Yeah. Next question.
First of all, I just want to thank you for providing this service. I bought my first Bitcoins from BTC-China about a year and a half ago. So,
well, congrats.
Yeah, thanks. So keep up the good work. My question was about the rulings on Thursday. You mentioned that goods and services cannot be sold in Bitcoin. I'm wondering if most investors in China, are they expecting that to change, or are they expecting the value to come from the international community, or what are they expecting?
So that's not going to change anytime soon. The government has made it clear that goods and services cannot be priced in Bitcoin and cannot be sold and paid for by Bitcoin. So that's the current stance, and all companies under the China law will follow that. What happens in the future, we'll wait and see what happens.
So are the investors then, are they expecting Bitcoin to have value just because of the international community, or is that what they're betting on? Or
well, Bitcoin has value for many other reasons, not just the fact you can remember person-to-person payments and also buying and selling on exchange. That's still legitimate. So there's still a lot of reason, and also Bitcoin is a worldwide phenomenon. So it's just because some countries you can do things with it, some countries you cannot. It doesn't mean the whole Bitcoin is shut down or anything.
Just because you can't buy a car in China with your Bitcoin, you could still buy a Tesla and then come pick it up.
I wanted to follow on his heels and clarify. There seems to be some discrepancy as to whether the ruling or the memo that was put out applied to financial instruments being priced in Bitcoin or all goods and services. Can you clarify as to whether all merchants are not allowed to accept Bitcoin, or is it only for existing financial instruments?
So it's both. Financial institutions can't touch it, and goods and services are not allowed to be sold or priced in Bitcoin. Two different points, and they both apply.
Yeah, Bitcoin is not a currency. Think of Bitcoin as eggs in the supermarket. If you buy a dozen eggs, you can't buy stock or gold with your eggs. Your eggs are, you buy it at the supermarket and you do whatever you want with it.
So the reason I ask is the United States has a provision for bartering, and I was wondering if it might fall under that headline, or if it's very drawn, clear line has been drawn in goods and services.
Bartering is a known concept in China. However, the ruling or the memo did not touch specifically on bartering. So that's still, we'll see how that develops. Thank you.
All right, you guys rocked it. Give them a big round of applause.